Before we get very far into our next story, we do have a warning for you tonight. What you're about to see and hear may not be suitable for children. Tonight, take a walk in their world.
Transpicuous news, connecting the dots between the lines.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Transpicuous News on December 28th. In what should be our last show of 2014, and starting next week, we will be broadcasting in live stream on the Conscious Consumer Network. So this will be our last time seeing it, probably looking at just like this. So we're going to dig into the news this week. Let me tell you. Christmas, everyone was all distracted and lots of interesting things came up. A couple of especially interesting ones came up. We're going to start off though today with what is probably the biggest story going around in the alternative media. If I can get my cursor to work. Look. AirAsia flight from Indonesia to Singapore confirmed missing. Yet another flight, another airline that runs out of Malaysia with a flight that's gone missing. And I was up, let's see, I woke up this morning, the flight had been missing for 5 hours when I got up this morning. And by then already, the wheels were turning with all kinds of missing information, crossed information. Heck, they couldn't even decide how many people were on the flight for the first few hours. So let's take a look at some of the information. So we know that this is the AirAsia flight that was going out of Surabaya to Singapore, lost contact with air traffic control, okay? With 161, 162, 163, 155, depending on how many people, whichever story you're reading. Now, the first thing I did is because the mainstream media was pushing the whole ideology of bad weather. It was bad weather. So I immediately went and pulled up satellite images of the weather. Now I was able to scroll this back. And this is a screenshot of the weather at exactly about 50 minutes after the last contact that was made by the airline, by the flight. So if we look at the satellite image, yes, there's heavy clouds. We can see here, I'll use my cursor here so you can see 2 red dots. There's our starting point, flying over here to Kuala Lumpur. Yeah, there is cloud cover. It's relatively heavy, but it's not that heavy. So one thing off the hop right there, very interesting. Now, immediately when you start following the timeline on this, you have little bits and pieces that make you go, I wonder. So at 11:10 this morning, dispatch information was made public, showed the plane took off with 8,296 kilograms of fuel, which is substantially more than the planned consumption of the flight, which would be only 5,200 kilograms of fuel. Interestingly enough, at 9 in the morning, it's been more than 8 hours since contact was lost with the AirAsia flight. The plane only had fuel for 4.5 hours. And yet it's only a 2 hour and 30-minute flight. Again, little things. So as we go through all the various pieces, now I want to say a huge call out thank you to Zero Hedge for capturing this little piece. They say they're talking about as Reuters reports, except that when you actually click on it, the Reuters article, none of this information's there anymore. Just love when they do creative editing. What's interesting, it says contact was lost at 6:17 a.m. local time after the crew asked for an unusual route. According to unnamed Indonesian transport official, there are 155 passengers and crew on the plane. an unusual route. So that's kind of interesting there as well. And of course now, if you go to the Reuters article, none of that's there. All been changed. So you start getting reports in. First of all, we have reports in an Indonesian news, which unfortunately I wasn't able to capture the screenshot of, saying that some local fishermen heard an explosion and were turning around to try and see what it was that they heard exploded. Then we have this one here, which is a local Indonesian news, saying that the family of a missing passenger received a glimmer of hope via a BlackBerry messenger, basically saying, we got word that the plan made an emergency landing in Belitung Timur. Everyone is safe, but we still need to be sure. One of the next things that's said then is that earlier this afternoon, reports quoted a National Search and Rescue Agency official that the missing Airbus A320 was believed to have crashed at a location in waters around Belitung, and that they're out searching over it. So we have reports, a text message saying they arrived safely in an emergency landing, and we have them saying that it crashed. Interesting, as we go back, and some of this is played out just like a repeat, of course, of the Air Malaysia flight this spring, with mainstream media saying things like they fell off the radar. And then other people making comments kind of like, well, maybe the transponder was broken. And again, say, as I did then, the transponder has nothing to do with radar. The transponder is a locator. Radar, you can't turn off. Radar is that big, it physically sees you in the sky. There's no way to disappear off radar, unless, of course, you have stealth technology, which I'm pretty sure AirAsia doesn't have, but you never know. So as soon as they say things like they've disappeared from radar, my little alarm bells go missing. Now, interesting stuff has come out today, though, like the fact that the AirAsia CEO sells shares in Tune Insurance the day before. AirAsia Group Chief Executive Officer sold 944,000 shares in the group's insurance investment arm, Tune Insurance Holdings. As many as 850,000 shares of the insurer were sold on Monday, and 94,800 were sold the next day, all at 160 in their local currency. Isn't that interesting? Selling shares in their insurance. Kind of funny. Now, the next piece that showed up, this came out just a few hours ago, is the one Briton that was supposed to have been on board turns out to be a Mr. Choi Chi Man, who is based in Indonesia and is managing director at an energy firm called Alstrom Power. So, of course, you got to go looking up into this stuff just to see. I mean, anytime it's an energy company, you immediately go, "Ooh, what's going on?" Sure enough, Alstom has just pled guilty. This is December 22nd, to pay the U.S. a $772 million fine for bribery investigations with the Justice Department. Apparently, Alstom, an energy and transportation company, has been under investigation in a plot involving tens of millions of dollars in bribes paid to government officials in Indonesia and other countries to win power contracts. Interesting. Not saying it's linked. It's definitely very, very interesting. So, while all of this is going on, literally while all of this is going on, you have a ferry. It's a car ferry, and these ferries are ginormously huge. It has 222 cars on board and 466 passengers and crew. Between Greece and Italy, it catches on fire. and they're evacuating. And apparently the seas are rough. And at last check 3 hours ago, they still had only evacuated 165 people off the burning boat. There were still over 300 people on the top deck of this burning boat. So seriously, wow, that's all I can say. That it's taken them this long. I don't care how bad the sea is. You'd think they'd come up with a better way of getting people off of a burning boat. And right as that was going down, a Turkish merchant ship sank off the coast of Italy on Sunday with 11 men on board. And there are apparently 3 are missing for certain. So transportation issues abound. Now, I spent probably 6 hours today combing through a vast amount of information, really taking a close look, because we've had a lot. I've been following along a lot of aviation crashes, a lot this year. And there's been a lot of them that have rung a lot of interesting bells. Okay, and I went through and I actually documented some of the major ones. I did not even get into there was at a glance at least 7 or 8 medical evacuation flights that crashed this year. I didn't get into the military crashes. Literally, just take a look at some of the major ones. One of the things that popped up, I didn't even see this one. It literally, and the German minister, this is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, his airplane disappears from radar. And guess where he was? November 2nd, traveling in Asia, who's on his way from South Korea to Jakarta, Indonesia. Isn't that interesting? Same area, and his plane disappeared off the radar for several hours. And the funny thing is when you look into it, at no point do they give you any excuse of where his plane went or why. And there's no comments from the German Foreign Affairs Minister either. So, interesting stuff. Anyways, I compiled a list. I'm going to post it down below here. Take a look at some of the dates. Take a look at some of the very interesting people, like Laotian military generals who died in a plane crash this year, and Cambodian government ministers who died in a plane crash. All kinds of interesting people died in plane crashes this year. It kind of puts me in mind of the list of bankers' deaths that I published a few months ago, where out of I think it was 67 bankers who've suddenly died from mysterious issues this year, 6 of them were run over by minivans while they were riding a bicycle. So, kind of interesting. This is really cool, but this bears a lot of watching. The Brazilian Indians secured nationwide land victory on December 24th, preventing their Brazilian Congress from seizing control of the future of their lands. Now, I want to ask everyone to keep their eyes on this, because we don't want to have happen here what happened to the Maasai, which is, as soon as all the furor and everything got quiet again, the government turned around and went ahead and sold the lands anyway. So let's keep our eyes peeled on this one. Go away, fly. This is funny in its extreme sadness. You just have to shake your head how the US government botched its multi-million-dollar plan to beat childhood disease. They came up with this brilliant idea that they were going to track 100,000 American children from before birth to the age of 21, taking in all the factors, all the biological specimens, etc. In year 2000, Congress authorized the National Institute of Health to go ahead with the project. And in 14 years, they've spent $1.3 billion. In 2009, they had a grand total of 5,700 children enrolled in the program. Not 100,000, 5,700. And on December 12th, they basically shut the program down because they couldn't even be salvaged. They spent $1.3 billion, if you read the article, basically arguing over how they should set up this study. That's all they did. They never even actually got to doing any part of the study. $1.3 billion was spent fighting over who was in charge and how they should move ahead. Seriously, I cannot make this shit up. It's just unbelievable. On the same vein, senior research scientist at MIT is saying that half of all children will be autistic by the year 2025. And what's interesting is she is literally only focusing on Monsanto's Roundup herbicide and the residues in food. That's it. Just based on that one thing, she's talking about how the rates of autism are going to go up. Not GMO foods. She's not looking at vaccines or mercury or aluminum and chemtrails. No. Just because of Roundup. That is pretty freaking scary numbers, let me tell you. Go all organic, folks, but real organic. So, going back, we're going to go back. More and complete idiocy in the government. The insurer that got a $145 million loan under Obamacare is almost broke. Oh, it's terrible. He got a startup insurance company that was loaned $145 million by the U.S. government under Obamacare. It's funny because at the bottom, the California Republican who heads up the U.S. House Oversight Committee predicted last year that 5 co-ops that received $2 billion in loans under Obamacare wouldn't survive because of financial or regulatory shortcomings. Yeah. Seriously? Pardon me for being Canadian, because I mean, we have a slightly different outlook than Americans on this, but you know, the rest of the developed nations and most of the developing nations, hell, most of the third world countries have healthcare. And I don't know, we don't seem to lose $145 million to insurers. And seriously, you American guys, you gotta sort this shit out. Like, you guys got some serious issues over there. This is so funny. In Hong Kong, a Brinks armored truck flipped over on the road, and apparently 15 million Hong Kong dollars flew out of the back, blowing in the breeze. And the Hong Kong police have arrested 2, actually it's now up to 3, people for grabbing cash. One of them grabbed almost $2 million worth of cash. And they're arresting them. How dare they? I don't know. I like that whole possession is 9/10 of the law. So I found the money. I think I should be able to play with it. This, oh God, I mean, I covered this probably a few months ago now. Britain edges past France on the world stage. The U.S. economy, boosted by the inclusion of sex and drugs on the national accounts, overtakes France by a whisker to become the world's 5th largest economy. See, and who said that hookers and cocaine weren't going to get England farther ahead? Too funny for words. Now, for all of you who are ready to take a little jump off planet, just done with Earth, NASA plans for an off-world colony, a floating city above Venus. Yes, tomorrow Transformed explores innovative approaches and opportunities available in business and society through technology. And they're talking about building a home for a team of astronauts studying one of the solar system's most inhospitable planets. And what's really, really funny is the title says NASA's plan for off-world colony. And then at the very, very bottom of the article, it says, while NASA has no current plans to fund the concept, the Langley-based team continues its work in the hopes that the space agency could make the plan come to fruition within several decades. So, if you're waiting for a lift off planet, don't hold your breath if you're waiting on NASA. Just saying. And of course, you know, I can't help myself because it's the big banks. Credit Suisse facing a $10 billion mortgage fraud lawsuit in the US. It just makes me giggle every time I come across these, you know, I have to point them out. But then you have the flip side. So a couple weeks ago, we talked about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac going back to the 3% down payments. Well, guess what? Here we go, zero hedge again. Will we never learn? Subprime auto title loans. The car is at the center of the biggest boom in subprime lending since the mortgage crisis. The New York Times reports similar to how red-hot mortgage market once coaxed millions of borrowers into recklessly tapping the equity in their homes. The new boom is leading people to take out risky lines of credit known as title loans on their cars. No one's got any houses left, so, you know, we'll get them to take out a loan on their car instead. Yeah. This is another one here. Interesting. Again, currency. It's always currency. You know, hedge funds and currency. It's so much fun. British trader goes missing after 130 million pounds sterling of the client's cash just disappeared. So this is the biggest alleged fraud in recent British history. Yeah, notice they say British history, not City of London history. Now, this is one of those things where you just, I mean, could the US government have more issues with budgeting than they do already? Airstrikes against the Islamic State topped $1 billion, killing over 1,100 people. So I pulled out a calculator, and basically the US just spent a little over $900,000 per person that they just killed. $900,000. Now, there was a time a little while ago, okay, a long while ago, where I knew a couple of bikers who probably would have done it for $100 and a line of Coke. I don't know. I'm just saying. They seem to be having some serious budgeting issues. Maybe they should be looking for better results. Because seriously, this is just, wow. Can people not look at these numbers? I mean, even within the Pentagon? Seriously. We're going to talk about Cuba for a second. This is a really interesting article, and I actually suggest that people take a look at it and read the whole thing. Talking about the behind closed doors deal that Obama made with Cuba. That apparently has been in the planning stages for over 18 months. Very, very interesting stuff in here. The one thing I have to mention, this came out in the news just after Christmas. Apparently, no one told Benjamin Netanyahu the news ahead of time. He had to find out by watching the news. And he's seriously miffed. He doesn't want to play in their playground anymore. So, there. Benjamin's seriously pissed at you, Obama. Going back to the Sony stuff in North Korea. This article in Zero Hedge had me giggling my ass off this morning. North Korea is now trolling Obama and compares the U.S. president to a monkey in a tropical jungle. It is a wonderful little article. The movie came and went, but not before some inexplicable reason an unknown power decided to escalate matters further following the FBI and Obama's threat for proportional response. And all of a sudden, North Korea had no internet and no cell phones. And then North Korea went from being kind of blasé about the whole thing to being kind of pissed off. And basically, a Let's see, what did it say here? It said they went off, they got kicked off, totally angry. And one of the TV anchors says that Obama goes reckless in speech and action like a monkey in a tropical jungle. Clearly, North Korea has had enough, and the former British ambassador to North Korea said they have calculated there's nothing to be gained from trying to be nice to him. So, yeah, I'm telling you, it's just beyond craziness. And then we have this little piece. December 23rd, Obama signs 5 new cybersecurity measures into law. Now, I've given them a quick run through. Oh, man, there's a lot of shit hidden in this, and you can just guarantee someone needs to pick this one apart. I don't have time right now, but yeah, definitely take a look at some of this legislation he's put into play. Maybe that's the excuse for him calling the Sony hack national security issue, because they needed to push this one through. Maybe. This is good. Very, very interesting. We talk about how they bring you out your little pieces of transparency. Okay? Break up Citigroup now. The article is, the presidential candidate who vows to dismantle the mega banks could win it all in the next U.S. election. At a stroke, Citigroup executives demonstrated both their continued political clout in Washington and their continued desire to take on excessive amounts of financial risk. As a result, breaking up Citigroup is under serious consideration as a potential campaign theme. Now, another thing that was just slipped into the news very quietly right before Christmas is that Citigroup is now deeper into the derivatives market than JP Morgan Chase. So them pushing for all these new laws in the US budget kind of stands to reason, considering they're now holding the biggest derivative fallout back. And want to know where all that money just went? This I just found today, and it was a thud moment. And this is it. This is what you're looking at. Record $36.5 billion were poured into stock funds in the latest weekly period, marking the biggest inflows on record as U.S. stocks surged to record highs. This is the biggest inflow since they began keeping track in 1992. Investors pledged entirely to funds that specialized in U.S. stocks, which attracted $39 billion. $39 billion all of a sudden just magically appeared to be put into the American stock market. And I'm going to tell you that I'm pretty sure if you were to go and backtrack it, you'd find out that all that cash that the banks now had access to since the repealing of the Dodd-Frank Act aspects, you know, you leverage that a good bit. Let's get some derivatives in there. Oh, look, got some money now we can play with. Let's go play in the stock market. Maybe they'll head to the casinos in New York next. Picture worth 1,000 words. Between 1990 and 2009, how 4 banks took over them all. Great little graph. I would say people should think about sharing this one out. Now, this is another one of those moments of transparency, the kind of like you look at and you say, did he really say that? And I actually went and tracked this down to make sure this wasn't a spoof, because I couldn't believe that this was actually said. Senator Graham threatens U.S. could suspend funding to the UN over Palestine bid. Get this. Graham added that any effort by the French, the Jordanians, or anyone to avoid direct negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians over the peace process, anyone who tries to take this to the UN Security Council, will be met with a violent backlash by the Congress that could include suspending funding to the United Nations. He told Netanyahu that Congress has your back in a very bipartisan way. I, like John on the floor, I really can't believe this is mainstream media. That the US Congress is going to cut funding to the United Nations if they do anything to interfere with Israel trying to not allow Palestine to have state. Wow. Now, this little article is really important. It was published December 25th, a day when I'm sure not very many people were actually watching the news or reading. They're all busy. Germans hoard 6.6 billion euros worth of obsolete Deutschmarks. Despite the currency being replaced by the euro, Germans still have some 12.9 billion Deutschmarks, the equivalent of 6.6 billion euros. Germany abolished the Deutschmark in 2002 when it entered the Eurozone. When European currencies were unified, and the Bundesbank started changing the marks into euros at a fixed rate of 1.96 Deutschmarks per every euro, and will continue to do so indefinitely. According to a poll conducted by the INID Institute and Postbank, 74% of Germans with Deutschmarks in their pocket see a sentimental value in them. 24% keep part of their savings in the old currency, while 22% simply forgot to convert their assets. Yeah, they simply forgot to convert their assets. If they have a fixed exchange rate and it is still open and that they can continue to do so to exchange the money indefinitely, then I'd say the Deutschmark isn't actually obsolete at all, is it? And considering the fact that the whole Deutschmark thing keeps popping up again and again, I find the timing of this article very, very interesting. Now, literally within minutes of me hitting publish on last week's Transpicuous News issue, this story came out. And it's just steamrolled. We were talking about the Russian ruble crashing, etc., etc. Nigeria and Belarus halt all FX trading as the central banks try to stop people from panicking. Okay, Russia stopped the FX trading floor the day before, which was the 18th of December. As a result, after that, Nigeria and Belarus both halted their trading floors to stop all trade on the forex of their currencies. Now, little side note here, Nigeria seems to be having a problem, the Nigerian government, because apparently they've lost $20 billion in oil revenue. And the opposition party would really like to know where the hell it went to, but I digress. A few days after this, on December 21st, Belarus blocked all online sites, all the alternative media sites that were dealing with financial stuff, and online stores to stop people rushing to secure their savings. That's how bad it was going. Then, 2 days after that, 6 days after that, the Belarus president ousted the prime minister, the head central banker, and replaced the ministers for economics and industry as well. So things are not going very well over there with Belarus, and this is a very indicative thing that's going on, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of this, especially in some of these smaller nations. Now, biggest news this week. The Central Bank of Russia launches the SWIFT code alternative for domestic payments. And Russia said they were going to do it. It was planned to be launched, I believe, in May of 2015. Well, they decided to, with all this shit coming down, let's just push that right forward. And they launched this past week, December 26th. This removes them out of the system of SWIFT banking, owned by HSBC, never mind. And this is a huge call because this is a new payment system. And who do you think they're going to use it with next? China pledges to help Russia overcome economic hardships. Boosting trade in yuan is a solution proposed by Beijing's commerce minister. Now, I was talking about this a little while ago, and this is rolling out. I'm watching it all come into play. Zero Hedge had a little article 2 days ago. So while U.S. continues to parade with destroying the Russian economy, even if it means crushing the shale industry, aka the only bright spot and high-paying job-creating industry in the U.S. economy, Russia and China continue to be nudged by the West ever closer monetarily and strategically, until one day, as we have long predicted, China and Russia will announce a joint currency, one backed by both China's surprising gold reserves and Russia's commodity hoard. This, more and more people, in the last week and a half, I cannot believe the amount of financial alternative media gurus who are coming out now and saying, here it comes, China and Russia, gold backed, it's going to happen. And and what happens when, Russia has oil and China needs oil, and China has gold and Russia needs gold? Well, then Russia buys gold from China and pays with oil. Kind of gets rid of the entire OPEC problem, doesn't it? Just a little bit. This was a major article. Again, December 25th. So a day when, people are eating turkey, drinking nog, not really paying attention to the news. China steps in as the world's new bank. Thanks to China, Christine Lagarde of the IMF, Jim Yong Kim of the World Bank, and Takahiko Nako, pardon me for the pronunciations, of the Asian Development Bank may no longer have much meaningful work to do. Beijing's move to bail out Russia on top of its recent aid for Venezuela and Argentina signals the death of the post-war Bretton Woods world. It also marks the beginning of the end for America's linchpin role in the global economy and Japan's influence in Asia. Farther down in the article, what happens if the Federal Reserve's tapering slams economies from India to Indonesia and governments look to China for help? Why would Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam bother with the IMF's conditions when China writes big checks with few strings attached? Yes. All very interesting. Now, like I said, we've watched this stuff play out, and we're watching everything scroll through, keeping our eye on the ball. Like I said, watching gold, watching China, especially watching the gold, interesting that these type of articles would come out all of a sudden right now. Chinese gold diggers drop their shovels as gold miner bankruptcies begin. They're talking here saying, for those wondering where U.S. shale exploration and production companies will be in about 2 to 3 years, look no further than the gold miners. Case in point, Canadian gold miner SandGold, which had a capitalization of over $1 billion in 2010, just filed for bankruptcy. SandGold spent $500 million on their assets, and they haven't had a profitable quarter in 6 years. The price of gold is too low for these companies to make their money back on, saying that even in China, the Chinese mines are closing down or slowing down on the amount of gold they're pulling out of the ground. You know, it's very, very interesting because, you know, gold's so cheap right now, they just can't make their money. And then, massive BC gold mine near Alaska border gets the environmental approval. This is the biggest gold and copper mine. They're calling it the largest undeveloped gold reserve in the world. 35 kilometers south of the Alaskan border. I'm sure there'll be a border dispute over that later on, somewhere in the future. What's interesting is they discovered this in 2008. It's taken them 6 years to either A, come up with the $5 billion it's going to need for them to actually open the mine, or B, pay off enough people in the Canadian government so the Canadian Environment Assessment Agency would allow it to go through. What people don't realize, gold mining is one of the most toxic forms of mining in the world. You separate gold using mercury. The sludge ponds are horrific. So keep this in mind. Why now? Why is Canada suddenly opening up the biggest undeveloped gold reserve in the world after sitting on it for 6 years? And finally today, this was one of my favorite stories. And I do like it when fingers are starting to get pointed by other governments. The U.S. is behind the current drop in oil prices, saying Bolivia's president. The U.S. is behind the current drop in oil prices as it is aiming to undermine the economies of large petroleum producers, Russia and Venezuela. Very interesting. And he says in an interview with RT, the U.S. thinks we are living 2, 3, or 500 years ago instead of today, but all of the past should remain in the past. The U.S. should realize this. America is acting like other large empires did for centuries, as they disseminate strife and hatred inside and outside, wishing to establish political control over other nations and to plunder them. I'm telling you, it's actually very interesting. The more research I've done on Bolivia's president, Evo Morales, and the president of Uruguay, I'm seriously considering moving to South America, because at least they've got a couple of political leaders that seem like they're somewhat on the ball and pretty much kind of working for the people, which is a nice change. You know, me coming from North America and all. Anyways, my friends, that is it for this week. Take a look at the plane crash information I'm posting down below. Take a look at the gold situation. Watch everything rolling in. Now, I will also say as a little side note, last week's Transpicuous News, or the week before, I was talking about new financial systems coming into play, and I made a small comment to the effect that I am pretty certain that in the background there are those who are waiting for the moment to arrive to actually step in and make the changes that need to be made for the greater good. And I was on a call last night, an intel call, and I got a little more confirmation along those lines. And I didn't get very much information, and I'm waiting in the hopes that in a few weeks' time I will have more information. But I just want to put this out there to everyone that, you know, this is not the end. This is just the beginning, and a whole new beginning. And I really feel very, very positively that once we get through all the shit and all the muck falls down, that things are going to be looking really bright and shiny very, very quickly. And with that, my friends, I bid you a happy end of 2014, and I will see you next week on Transpicuous News on the Conscious Consumer Network. Bye, everyone.
Transpicuous News, connecting the dots between the lines.